In a farmhouse outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a woman braided her granddaughter's hair while standing in morning light. She was 83 years old. Her own hair, pinned beneath her prayer cap, was thick enough that the cap sat noticeably raised above her head. That is not normal aging. And the closer you look at the women in these communities, the more that fact demands an explanation. Most women in mainstream American culture start noticing real hair thinning somewhere between 50 and 65. By their 70s, it is often dramatic. Doctors explain it as inevitable hormonal decline, reduced scalp circulation, genetic destiny, and yet inside these specific communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, the pattern consistently breaks. The hair stays. Not for everyone, not as a miracle, but as a statistical outlier that is noticeable enough that dermatologists who work near these counties have mentioned it in conversations that never quite make it into published literature. So before anyone tries to sell you something, the first question worth asking is, what are they actually doing differently, and for how long have they been doing it? The methods I'm sharing are inspired by traditional practices of Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. These are closed, non-commercial communities. They do not sponsor content. They do not have brand deals. What they have is continuity, generational practices passed from grandmother to mother to daughter across more than 2 centuries on the same land without interruption. That unbroken chain is not romantic sentiment. It is actually the most rigorous test for efficacy available to us, not a 6-week clinical trial funded by the company selling the ingredient. 200 years of the same women, same climate, same methods, and the same observable results. The ritual in question happens once a week. It has 3 components. None of them cost more than a few dollars a month. And the reason most of you have never heard it described in these terms has less to do with ignorance and more to do with a deliberate silence that runs all the way back to a specific regulatory decision made in 1938. Here is where the record actually begins. In 1938, the United States passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It was a genuine legislative achievement in many respects, but tucked inside, it was a decision about cosmetics specifically that would define the next 8 decades of the American beauty industry. Congress granted the FDA authority to regulate cosmetics, but gave it almost no power to enforce ingredient safety before products reached shelves. A company did not need to prove its hair or skin product was safe. It only needed to avoid getting caught after the fact. That framework, written in 1938, was not substantially updated until 2022, 84 years, during which time the industry grew from a regional collection of small producers into a global market worth over $500 billion. That is not a regulatory gap, that is a business model. In 1976, the industry established the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel. It sounds like oversight. It is funded entirely by the Personal Care Products Council, which is the industry's own trade association. The panel has reviewed thousands of ingredients over the decades. It has no enforcement power. It can recommend, it cannot require. And what it has consistently recommended over and over is that ingredients already profitable to its funders are safe for continued use. There is no conspiracy required to understand this. The structure makes the outcome inevitable. Meanwhile, the commercial hair care industry spent the second half of the 20th century quietly replacing simple, effective ingredients with engineered synthetics that created the sensation of results without the biology of results. Silicones that coat the hair shaft and make it feel smooth without nourishing the scalp. Sulfates that strip not just product buildup, but the scalp's own sebum, the natural oil that is, as it turns out, one of the most important factors in follicle health. Fragrances labeled as a single word on the bottle, potentially containing hundreds of undisclosed compounds that accumulate in the skin and scalp tissue over years of weekly use. The EU moved to restrict undisclosed fragrance compounds in cosmetics beginning in 2003. The United States still lists fragrance as one word on the label today. That is the silence the title is pointing at, not a dramatic suppression, a structural one. The less you know about what is in the bottle, the more bottles you buy. The Amish women never stopped knowing what was in theirs. The first component of the weekly ritual is scalp oiling, done the evening before washing, not as an afterthought. As the primary event, a small amount of pure oil, historically, whatever was most available in the region, which in Pennsylvania, Amish households was often lard-based or plant-derived from what the farm produced, worked directly into the scalp with the fingertips for 10 to 15 minutes. Not the hair length, the scalp. This matters because hair loss in aging women is predominantly a scalp issue before it is a hair issue. The follicles themselves are still present in most cases of age-related thinning. They have become miniaturized, underfed, and understimulated. The hair they produce gets progressively finer until it is barely visible. What the scalp needs is increased circulation, which manual massage delivers, and lipid replenishment, which oil delivers. This is not traditional wisdom in conflict with science. This is traditional wisdom that science has spent decades catching up to. A study published in the journal Dermatology and Therapy in 2016 found that standardized scalp massage performed 4 minutes daily over 24 weeks, produced measurable increases in hair thickness. The mechanism proposed was mechanical stretching of the dermal papilla cells, the cells at the base of the follicle responsible for hair growth signals. The Amish weekly session is longer than 4 minutes. It has been the weekly anchor of grooming for generations. And it costs nothing beyond the oil and the time. The oil itself is the second component, and this is where the documentary specificity matters. The oils used in these communities are not cosmetic-grade oils with added preservatives, stabilizers, and synthetic carrier compounds. They are single-ingredient, unrefined, cold-pressed, or traditionally rendered. Castor oil appears consistently across multiple accounts and historical agricultural records as a common trade, good in these communities through the 19th and early 20th centuries. Pure, thick, unrefined castor oil. In more recent decades, olive oil grown and cold-pressed regionally has also been documented. Here is the number that changes everything. Ricinoleic acid, the primary fatty acid in pure castor oil, makes up approximately 90% of its composition. It is one of the few naturally occurring hydroxyl fatty acids, meaning it has a structural affinity for protein and hair is almost entirely protein. The molecule binds to the keratin structures in the hair shaft and, more critically, to the sebum and tissue at the scalp surface in a way that supports rather than replaces the skin's own lipid barrier. This is not a coating, it is integration. The difference is biological, and it is visible over time. The third component is the rinse. Apple cider vinegar diluted in water used as a final scalp and hair rinse after washing. This is perhaps the single most dismissed practice among the three, because it is so simple that it does not feel like it could matter. It does. The scalp's natural pH sits between 4.5 and 5.5 on the acid scale. Most commercial shampoos, including many marketed as natural or gentle, sit at pH levels above 6, sometimes as high as 9. Repeated alkaline washing disrupts the scalp's acid mantle, the invisible protective film produced by sebaceous glands, and creates conditions where the scalp becomes inflamed. The follicle environment becomes hostile, and the cycle of thinning accelerates. Diluted apple cider vinegar with a pH around 3, when used as a rinse after washing, helps restore the scalp surface to its natural acidic range. It does not sting if properly diluted. It does not smell by the time the hair dries. And it costs less per year than a single bottle of any prestige scalp treatment currently on the market. A woman I spoke with, 67 years old, retired school teacher, mother of 4, living outside of Strasbourg, Pennsylvania had been doing this exact 3-part routine for over 30 years, taught to her by a neighbor from an Amish background. Her monthly cost for all 3 components combined was under $4. Her hair, at 67, was visibly full. When I asked what she would say to women who assumed thick hair at her age was just genetics, she said, Genetics is what you start with. What you do every week is what you end with. That distinction is worth sitting with. Now, here is what this does not do, and this matters. This routine, done consistently, can slow and in some cases partially reverse follicle miniaturization. It can improve scalp health measurably over months of practice, but it does not regenerate follicles that have been fully dormant for many years. If you have significant hair loss defined clinically as alopecia with visible scalp, particularly in patterns that have been present for more than a decade, this is not a reversal protocol. It is a preservation protocol. The women in these communities who maintained thick hair into their 80s started this in their 20s and 30s, not in their 60s. Earlier is always better, but beginning at 60 is still better than not beginning. The biology of the scalp responds at any age. The degree of response depends on where you are starting from. That honesty is not a disclaimer to protect the channel. It is the only way to respect you. The practices described here were not invented by the Amish. They preserved them, and they were not alone in that preservation. Ancient Roman physicians documented scalp oiling as a standard grooming practice for maintaining hair density into old age. Egyptian papyri from the Middle Kingdom period, dating back nearly 4,000 years, describe castor oil applied to the scalp specifically for hair loss. Ayurvedic medicine in India codified hot oil scalp treatments called Shiro Abhyanga as part of preventive health practice thousands of years before the first American cosmetic company was incorporated. Traditional Korean hair care, particularly in rural communities before industrialization, centered on fermented rice, water rinses for the scalp, a vinegar-adjacent acidic treatment that served the same pH restoration function. These are not overlapping coincidences. They are different civilizations arriving at the same biological conclusion because the biology was never ambiguous. Only the market made it complicated. The Amish did not invent this knowledge. They simply never sold it away. If you have tried expensive scalp serums, laser combs, or prestige shampoo systems that made promises they did not keep, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are from, even just your state, and what you were told it would do. I want to know how many of us got the same script handed to them by a different bottle. And think for a moment about where your own grandmother was from and what she put on her hair before there was a beauty aisle. There is a good chance you know something she used that you quietly stopped using because it seemed too simple to be real. If you are the kind of woman who believes real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. The next video is one I have been building for months. It is about the Amish use of a single fermented food applied topically, a practice documented in Lancaster County households going back to the 1800s, and what a dermatologist in rural Ohio said when she started recommending it to patients in their 60s. The ingredient was formally studied in a university trial. The results were published. Then the study quietly disappeared from the database of the organization that funded it. The year that happened was 2009, and the company that had the most to lose was named in the acknowledgments section